All right, so we're going to start by looking at how you create a histogram. So a histogram is different to a column graph, and we have two different types. So we're going to do a histogram from ungrouped data, and we'll do a histogram from grouped data. So just like a regular column graph, etc., we need a title. And then from there, we can draw our frequency, our axes, and label those. So our y-axis is always frequency, and our x-axis is our independent variable. So the data that we're gathering. Now, I've left this gap here because what we need to do is, a lot of the time you'll find that your data set won't actually start at 0. So when it comes to golf scores, these golf scores start at 62. Okay, so my first one is actually 62. Okay, and then 5, 7, 8, 9. All right, make sure my axes go on. Okay, now because it starts at 62 and then I go up in an even scale, always an even scale regardless of the data collected, and you'll see that we actually don't have any data for 66, but we just leave that blank. We don't skip that one out of the axis. But what we do to indicate that the data set actually skips from 0 and begins at 62 is we do kind of like a little heartbeat, just like that. Okay, and that just shows us that we're not starting right at 0, we're starting the data set a little further along. But we can then write our frequencies. So starting at 0 always, 8. Obviously when you do this, you'll be using a ruler and preferably graph paper. Okay, so from there, and again, this is our ungrouped data. Now, we know that it's ungrouped data because each of those data points there, these ones, are just single numbers. So they're not a group, they're not an interval. Okay, 62, 63, 64. So what we do there is now we draw them in. So if I have a look, Jack got 62 as a golf score twice. So my column will go to 2. And as you can see, 62, the actual data point, is right in the center of the column, okay? The other thing to note about a histogram is that the columns have to touch. So in a column graph, there are spaces, even spaces, but in a histogram, those columns touch. So this next one, 63, is actually 3. Is its frequency. 64 back down to 2. 65, 7, so that goes all the way up here. You can also see that my frequency goes slightly higher than what I actually need it to be so that I can actually extrapolate later maybe. 66, as I said before, no scores, so we leave that blank. 67 goes back to just getting 2 of those. 68, he got 4 of that score. And 69, 2. So you can see each of those data points are in the middle of the column. Our columns are touching, nice and straight. Yeah. Okay, so histogram for ungrouped data. Now we're going to have a look at grouped data. Okay, so a group data example means that you actually have intervals, okay, and you want to graph those. Okay, so this one is just going to be scores. So just a simple title, looking at scores. Now I'm going to draw it quite long here and this way. So I'm going to have 0 and then 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. And this way 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Look at that. This one, now if we were starting at less than 0, we would do our little heartbeat. But this one, this interval starts at 0 to 20. So we can do that. So 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So you can see, especially at the frequency side, that we go up in an even scale. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We pick the scale that fits the data. So if our frequency ranges from 0 to 14, you know, and they seem to be whole numbers, maybe even, you know, in fairly evens, we could do it in 1s or 2s. If it was a wider range, in order to not make that too big, we might go up in 5s or something perhaps. You just have to actually look at what your data gives you. So we need to actually write frequency. So we need to label, this is the score, label our axes. Now, basically, what's going to happen is we look at the class interval. So the interval is 0 to 20. So from 0 to 20, we're 3. Our score is 3. Okay, and so you can see that the column actually goes on either side of the interval. Next, from 20 to 40, we've got 4 is our score. So, well, 4 of them that got 20 to 40, sorry. 40 to 60, so here we go up to 11. So that's about 11. And again, so our column goes from 40 to 60. 60 to 80, much better score. We've got 13. It's about there. All the way to 80. And 80 to 100, we head back down to 3 people with a score of 80 to 100. So again, just like the last one, we have whether it's group data or ungrouped data, we need a title for the graph. We need titles on both of our axes. We put our data points along the x-axis and frequency goes along the y-axis. Need to make sure that your data point's really clear, and when it is group data, that the column sits with the data point directly underneath the middle of the column. When it is group data, we make sure that the column goes from one side to the other of the group of the interval. And last of all, if your data set starts further in than 0, so you don't want to actually start at 0 because it starts at 62 and then goes up, draw your little heartbeat sort of symbol to indicate that you're skipping over and starting your data set further on than 0. Okay, so make sure that you know how to create histograms, because next we're going to start looking at the skew of histograms. So looking at distribution and how they can be skewed and what that really tells us.